So hello there, I'm Soon-Young Yoon with the International Alliance of Women, and I'm here with Bandana Rana, who is a wonderful feminist leader, vice chair of the CEDAW committee, which you all know as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, our premier human rights treaty. So Bandana was very instrumental in what we call the GEAR campaign, which 10 years ago helped actually establish a new UN entity called UN Women. So we are going to ask Bandana, in fact, I'll ask her right now, Bandana, what were some of the challenges that you personally felt at the time, 10 years ago, gearing up for the GEAR campaign? And what do you think was the secret of getting it done?
Thank you so much, Soon-Young. It's just such a pleasure to talk to you always, and particularly on something that I devoted so much time and passion on. I even get goosebumps now, nostalgia, you know. I remember I was the chair of the National Women's Commission in Nepal then. And when the UN Coherence Panel was formed, you see, there were 15 members in the Coherence Panel. I still remember that, and 3 chairs. And one of the chair was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The other was Mozambique and Norway, Prime Ministers of Mozambique and Norway. It's still in my head, you see. So I was the chair, and we realized the importance of this is our only chance to influence this UN reform process to ensure that we have an entity that is well-financed, well-resourced in terms of human resources, financial resources, and particularly a place on the table, because we had a small UNIFEM at that time, you know. And I recall if I went to UNDP for some programs or support, they would say, oh, this is not for you, it's UNIFEM, you know, you go to UNIFEM. And UNIFEM would not have that kind of resources. It was a small office. So we realized this is our only chance to influence the UN reform process for seeking a resourceful entity that would actually work for the empowerment of women and gender equality. So as I was the chair of the National Women's Commission then, I called a meeting, and I still remember we named that meeting Friends of UNIFEM. Oh. So yeah, we called a meeting, and I recall 35 representatives from different civil society attending that meeting, who claimed and owned that they were friends of UNIFEM, you know, and they wanted to see UNIFEM be bigger and more resourceful. So that was the basic understanding. So that is how we started small from Nepal. And then we realized, of course, Nepal alone, like everything is happening in New York. So how do we get our voices across to New York? That was the biggest challenge. The time difference, the time zone difference was a big challenge, because we used to hear there's a decision taking place tomorrow. We need to have this facts on the table. So I would be working at night, you know, so that when New York wakes up, they have the facts in their table. At that time, we didn't have this kind of technology, as you know. And in Nepal, even finding a fax was difficult, actually, you see. So I tell you, the 2006, 2007, I think I did no other work, but only this work, you know. So that was, yeah, that I totally devote, because my term terminated as a National Women's Commission chair, and I was a bit free, and I felt this is my time to devote all my attention to this. So I totally devoted my attention to this. So when you talk about the biggest challenge, one challenge was I was trying to mobilize the community to get their voices and leverage, you know, saying that we need this entity. And I remember one lady saying, what do we care about UN? You know, what we care is, yeah, what we care is we need a roof, we need clothes, we need food to eat, education for our children. We don't care about UN. We don't know where UN is. It sounds so distant, you know. But one community woman stood up and said, wait a minute, water is scarce in Nepal. And, you know, in order to fetch water, you need to walk miles. So it's very precious. So you have to use it very sparingly. Suppose if you have a bucket of water and you want to wash yourself, if you start from your feet, you are going to waste, you may waste the entire bucket washing your feet, and the rest of your part will not be, influenced with the water. So you need to actually start from the top in order for you to be able to,
what a beautiful metaphor.
Yes. So then she said, like, with scarce water, you will be able to then wash your entire body if you start from the top, So that is where the UN is, I believe. That's what the community lady said, So that is why it is important that we know about UN, we influence UN, we make this entity a resourceful entity so that the effects ripple down to us, So that was so beautiful that, I mean, there are so many learnings in my entire advocacy for this UN Women, But it's like I told you, almost 2 years, I totally devoted myself into that pro bono, So that is one learning. So that was the challenge, trying to convince and get the leverage of community women why we need this entity, But this was such a lovely learning that I learned from her. And the other one, I remember then we expanded to South Asia. So I was the coordinator. I expanded this campaign to South Asia, and we called it South Asian Campaign for Gender Equality. You see?
No more Friends of UNIFEM?
No, because now it was getting to South Asia. The Friends of UNIFEM was in our concept, but it was more a campaign. We needed not a narrow UNIFEM alone kind of a connotation in the campaign. We needed a broader campaign. So that's why we called it South Asian Campaign for Gender Equality. Of course, in the context, the status of UNIFEM came, why we need to advance it came. And one of the reasoning, which is so understood in South Asia, is some countries have a women ministry, some countries don't. Right. Even if you have a women ministry, the women ministry is the most marginalized ministry. It does not have, it's not considered the important ministry. So it has the least resources, the least authority. And in countries where there is no ministry, there's a department. So we had to explain this way, the UNIFEM is like that. In the bigger UN, you talk about gender equality so much, but when you look at the entity that delivers on gender equality, it's like our women's department. It's like our women's ministry, very few resources, no authority, no place on the decision-making table. So that is why we need this entity. So that was understood easily, so that was the other thing. Then I remember I led a delegation because our nearest coherence panel chair was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shaukat Aziz. He was the Prime Minister. So we said we need to go to Pakistan. We need to carry our message. And I led this delegation, a small delegation of South Asian representatives from all 6 countries, and went to Pakistan. We were fortunate. We got an appointment from the Prime Minister. Wow. And yes, it's, like I'm telling you, I get goosebumps, like what I
As you should.
So, yeah. And then, like I remember the foreign secretary of Pakistan then was a former ambassador to Nepal. So he knew me well also, you see. Right. So he was in Nepal and he was the foreign secretary then. He was looking after all the Prime Minister's foreign appointments. And he was very supportive. So we got this appointment, and I think there were 10 of us from South Asia, senior leaders, even senior than me, but we went there. Sorry, I'm sorry about this. And then I forgot to put off my phone, you see. So
there you are in great demand, obviously.
and so here we went, like we went to meet the Prime Minister with all the protocol and all that, the security and everything. So I was informed that by the secretary that you are going to hand over the memorandum. You are the only one who's going to speak, like there was this protocol. So I said, okay, and I felt a bit awkward because I was the youngest from the delegation, but I was the coordinator of the campaign itself. So everyone was very supportive. So I went there, and then we went there, and I briefed the Prime Minister on why we need this entity, because we didn't know it's going to be named UN Women. We said it's a gender entity. So why do we need this entity? And then he said, well, you are 10 of you. So this is the challenge. He said, you are 10 of you. And how can I believe that this is a demand of the entire South Asian women, the community, the women that will benefit from this? You need to give me the leverage, that leverage. How am I going to believe that? So that was the biggest challenge for me. So I said, Prime Minister, I will make sure I will send to you evidence that this is what the women of South Asia will need, So he said, okay, I will await that evidence. So, but it was a supportive meeting. He said, I basically genuinely support. So we went back, and you know what we did? Within 2 months, we collected 1 million signatures from South Asia,
Wow.
And it was not like today's time. Like
No.
today, maybe they will give it electronically. It was that signature. I still have those dossiers,
Oh, we must put them in a museum. We must archive them.
Yeah, so
very precious.
I actually presented it to Michelle Bachelet when she took up the UN Women Executive Director. Those huge books that I presented to her. And not only that, now I had the signatures. Within 2 months, 1 million signatures. There were around this campaign, there were around 200 institutions that were mobilized, you see, from all over South Asia. So that's why I'm saying I totally did only this work, only this. I couldn't have done anything else.
Now you said 2006.
6 and 7, 2006.
You started actually almost 4 years before the General Assembly.
Yes.
Took that long.
It was. I remember in fact, I remember my first meeting was 2006 April when I called that Friends of UNIFEM meeting. You see, so then of course I had this. Then I had this leverage. Now, how am I going to deliver it? Like I have this huge packages from South Asia. I got it. I compiled it. They would send it. Now I couriered this to the 3 coherence panel chairs, Mozambique, Norway, and Pakistan. You see, so so couriering the documents, so that was the leverage that I produced to the Pakistan's Prime Minister as evidence of the demand of what the community women want. Now I hope you have time because I have lots of stories.
This is really important history.
And then now what happened is, after some months, around 4 to 5 months after I had collected those leverage, let's say, I was invited to an international conference by the Women's Ministry in Pakistan. So I went to Pakistan, and the chief guest of that conference was the Prime Minister, you see. But in Pakistan, there's so much of security. You have to go there 2 hours in, advance. You don't know from which door the Prime Minister is appearing, whether it's a motorcade or a helicopter. Everything is hush hush. It's so much of security, you see.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm just one of the participants, not a significant guest as such, but one of the participants. So I was in the 5th or 6th row, I think 6th, 7th rows, and the Prime Minister's dais was way up, So here's the Prime Minister. He comes and he started his speech where he had a written speech and he was reading. While he was reading, I said, I wish the Prime Minister, because this was an international conference, I wish the Prime Minister would say something about the gender entity and the UN reform. It was in my mind all the time. I wish. But of course, it was a written speech and he was reading it. And then at the end of it, he folded his written speech and he said, well, I recollect one thing, there is this South Asian women, he started saying, women who are campaigning for a UN entity that has resource, and we have kept it in mind, we are discussing it. He was positively, he spoke 3-4 minutes about the entity and their support and their honesty in trying to make this happen, So I was like, I was so overwhelmed, There were tears in my eyes, My hair stood on end. But listen to this. What happened then is, usually the Prime Minister comes down, and those who are right in front, he just waves to them and goes.
Of course.
Normally, I'm not a very pushy person. But this time I said, I wish I can go in front and at least say thank you to him. So I tried to push my way in front. And just as the Prime Minister was coming, the security guard told me, no, madam,
Of course.
the Prime Minister was almost going. He turned around, he looked at me, shook my hand and said, madam, I saw you in the audience and I remembered your campaign, So I have witnesses who have seen this. So, I can never forget. This is history for me if I write a book also, A prime minister of a country who is a chair of a coherence panel of UN sees me in the audience and remembers the campaign and expresses his commitment towards this campaign.
In front of a huge audience.
What can be more gratifying than this? So this is what I call advocacy, influencing the right people at the right time, So, this is, this, you are giving me an opportunity to reflect on all my memories, my positive
That's wonderful.
memories.
So at what point did you connect with other regions?
Yeah. And then it was I think around 2008, so this was 2006, 2007. We did it regionally, nationally. And then around 2008, because of course we needed to connect to New York because all decisions takes place there. And I remember attending the first meetings in Baha'i International, with Charlotte and widow Jane, I think, was there from WeDo. Do you remember Jane? It's Jane?
It's probably June.
June, sorry.
It would have been Charlotte Bunch and June Zeitland.
Right.
Yes, and so who else was there? Who else was there? Can you recall in that meeting?
I remember significantly, of course, Baha'i Bani was there.
Dugal
Bani was there,
from Baha'i.
Of course, yes. And then all of us, Sharon, but New York was Bani, Charlotte, June, like all of them I remember so much. And we had series of meetings. We called the campaign gear. Even in naming, we had meetings. So I did travel to New York frequently as part of the GEAR campaign focal point. So I was the focal point for South Asia. Perfect. As the GEAR campaign. And as I said, I remember during my campaign, when I went, those faxes, I used to be told, UNIFEM South Asia would help me to say that I would ask them, what is happening? What is the decision? You have to link me to New York, So they would say, if you want your voice to be heard, your fax needs to be on, they would just call me and said, fax needs to be on the table, in so-and-so's table tomorrow morning. So at night, I would be writing the fax and delivering the fax. And then when I was in New York, I took an appointment with my South Asian delegation. I actually met all South Asian ambassadors also.
In New York.
So in New York. And then I went to meet the Pakistani ambassador. So he had his first secretary who received me. And I gave him my visiting card because we didn't have this Zoom at that time, right? We never used it, we never thought. So he looked at my card and he got up and he said, oh my God, you are Bandana Rana, my God, our desk is flooded with your letters and your emails and your faxes, So my name was already very familiar with them.
There you are.
Rather than, so that's, these are kind of reflections that I have from campaigning for UN Women. So these were, when you said let me just spell out the challenges. One was convincing the community women of why we require this. The second was reaching out to a larger network, throughout South Asia. The third was when the Pakistani Prime Minister threw this challenge on me, where is your leverage? Who is your leverage? How do I believe you? And then collecting the million signatures. With those million signatures, not having the kind of technology we have now, reaching out, couriering it, faxing, the time zone difference. So, but then after we connected with GEAR, we felt strong, we felt it's a collective action. This is how we can go collectively. It's now become a global campaign. So this was extremely gratifying. So these were my challenges. I will stop here for your first question, but this is
but then it leads perfectly into, say, in your own country, 10 years have passed. UN Women has been well funded. It is now the lead for all the other agencies in the UN system. It rose to great prominence in many places. But what about Nepal? Do you see any direct impact of UN Women in Nepal or in the South Asia region that you can tell us
Yeah,
about?
okay. Thank you, Soon-Young. Before I answer that question, I would also like to say that because I think I was rewarded in terms of my passion and my commitment and my dedication for such a long time, intensely, to this campaign, that I was selected to be the speaker representing the global civil society at the official launch of UN Women in February 2011. So I was very gratified, and I was also a member of the Global Civil Society Advisory Group when
Sure.
Michelle Bachelet was there for the first 2 years, and then Pumzile for the next 2 years. So just to let you know that I have been a part of that also.
Yes.
Well, the impact, now comes the impact. So, you know, like I feel that is why, because of the reason that I have been so engaged with UN Women, I feel that I'm part of UN Women. I can never be, you know, not a part of UN Women. I feel the ownership. I feel so much for it, that it needs to prosper, it needs to flourish, it needs to deliver the dreams that we sold to the thousands of community women when we campaigned for this entity, you know. So
the
that
water
is my
that's flowing over from the top to the bottom.
So that is, yeah. So that is my thought. I have to admit, UN Women has not delivered to the extent that we expected. You know, perhaps we dreamt too much. Perhaps our aspirations, not yet, exactly. Perhaps our aspirations, perhaps we are too excited. We want results very fast, you know. But what I would like to say is that UN Women in Nepal, and particularly maybe in South Asia also, one thing, 2 or 3 things that it has significantly made a difference is influencing the government on the importance of gender equality, policies, interventions. It has a more stronger collaboration with government entities. So that way it has been able to strengthen the accountability of the government towards gender equality and women's empowerment commitments. It has strengthened accountability. It has capacitated government also. Wonderful. I should say. So that is a difference that I find. And to some extent, it has also helped in building collaboration and partnership between the government and civil society, you know. And you have said 1 or 2 examples. For example, also like, so these are some of the examples. I remember being in meetings with the government, UN Women, and some of the examples are, you know, because I remember particularly the earthquake in Nepal, the big earthquake that happened in 2015. You know, it was a devastating earthquake. We were not prepared for it. And those of us who worked with women whom we support, you know, support systems, shelters, victims, we found ourselves burdened with so much demand and not being able to deliver. So I had no time to read newspapers or anything, you know, because we were supporting women, children who were in need. But at such a moment, UN Women called a meeting, and we remember we needed to develop a memorandum. And I said, look, don't expect us women to read newspapers and look at what is happening. We don't know. We don't even have any statistics. We have so many other things to do. So at least UN Women can help us in compiling information. You know, where in other countries, what has been done when such a disaster occurs? How do we mainstream gender sensitivity? And I do remember UN Women collecting women's groups, forming a network, you know, coming up with a memorandum. Even now in Corona, UN Women has come up with a women's memorandum. So that kind of support, you know, like in disaster, in crisis, UN Women does provide its space and provide women with that capacity and resources in terms of, you know, it could be documents, it could be information, it could be best practices from other countries. So that is something that I have seen significantly. So these are some of the areas that I feel good about, in the sense that when I compare it, when we had just UNIFEM and now we have UN Women, what is the difference? So that is the difference I find about broader accountability of government, you know, being able to partner with government, assisting, capacitating governments, and building partnerships between civil society and government. So that is where the major difference is. However, what I don't find, when I told you like our aspirations and all that, is sometimes I feel, and I'm coming to the advice part, perhaps,
Yes,
like
please.
suggestions part.
Yeah, exactly.
Perhaps I should feel we are not able to, UN Women at a certain times, perhaps it's because of the resources, it was competing also with national level NGOs for the same fund, So sometimes there is this rift between it. And I feel that perhaps, and also, I personally have also experienced that UN Women funding INGOs rather than national level NGOs. Whereas INGOs have greater cost and national level NGOs can do the same work in less cost. So I think my mind, as going forward, I would suggest that UN Women capacitate national level NGOs who have outreach throughout the communities, throughout the country, and can deliver. Most of the times the argument is the reporting is not good, they won't be able to manage the fund, but no, that is a myth. There are organizations, for example, the organization I'm affiliated with, Sati, has been in existence for the last 28 years. We've worked with different communities. I'm not just calling about myself, but giving examples. So there are organizations with track records who are able to work in a lesser cost than an international NGO with communities who they understand even better. And the communities also respond to them better. So I think capacitating leadership in national level NGOs is one thing. And then the other is we need to have some longer term programs. The local women's initiatives, local women's campaigns, those innovative programs, those cannot be a one-time thing. You need to give to a long time. I'm talking about the local communities, the grassroots communities, the marginalized communities. There are so many local initiatives that needs to be supported and given continuity. It can have. So sometimes programs are like one time, 1 year, 6 months, 7 months. So I think we really need to build on longer term programs to see that it is delivered, that we have changed the lives of women. So that is what is necessary. I think we need to change. We need to bring the change that women aspired in their lives. So that is also something that I feel women do. And my last advice to UN Women is also, UN Women does a lot of campaign. We are working on gender equality, and it is trying to build on, trying to appeal to member states to implement those. Now, where is the mechanism? It's the CEDAW. CEDAW questions governments, CEDAW recommends governments, and it is the civil society who use the CEDAW recommendations to strengthen advocacy. So I feel that with CRC, there is a lot of tremendous support from UNICEF. That is why the CRC deliverables can be seen quickly.
For our listeners, what is CRC?
Oh, yes, it's the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
There we are.
So because it's to do with children, UNICEF partners very well with them and supports each other's work. There's synergy built. So I think we need to enhance the synergy and harmonize our work between the CEDAW committee and UN Women, because CEDAW deals with Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So that is where the work, the diverse work that UN Women is doing, we can hold governments accountable through the CEDAW mechanism. So I think we need to, it's not that we're not working together, but we need to strengthen and expand our synergy and harmonize our work together. I think that is another advice that I would like to give to UN Women. And I know UN Women has national, regional, global civil society advisory groups. I was a member also in the first civil society advisory group. Perhaps these advisory groups should not go to meetings just like, once a year or two times, 3 times a year, we have a national meeting and you have an agenda set and you give your input on your agenda and you have some decisions and come back. It should not function like that. This civil society should be the bridge between bridging the gap between the local women. What do they want? What are their demands? What are their needs? And then bringing it to the table and seeing how they can bring it back. So it should be like local to global and global to local. So that is the bridging the gap between the civil society advisory group and UN Women. So these are my very, very brief, I wouldn't say advice, a way forward to strengthen and enhance the work of UN Women. And we stand together with UN Women. We join hands in making it stronger.
So one of the things you said at the very beginning of this part of your discussion was how you felt a part of UN Women. And it is very apparent to someone who's watching this process that UN Women is unique in its relationship to a social movement. The other UN agencies, which function very well, often on the ground like UNFPA, UNICEF, were not established in such a fashion. They were not established by the feminist and women's movement or another movement. And therefore, the special relationship that allows and invites advice from the movement as it progresses, as it changes, even young feminists, I think is something that we would love to see emerge from UN Women at 10 as a message to the world of how unique this is and how it's the strength. It can be even stronger. And so all of these specific advice and vision that people like you who have seen it through its changes look forward, I think those are so valuable. So thank you for that observation. My last question about advice is looking to the Generation Equality Forum, this concept that we need to bridge the gap between generations. I know you focus a lot on younger feminist leaders. What would be the best advice you could give them in Nepal from your country or from your region about how they can engage with the UN?
Soon-Young, this is one of the most exciting conversation I had, again, talking about the youth, because my 2020 resolution is engaging more and more with the youth.
Okay.
And in line with that, and in line with the generation equality agenda, I think Nepal, I convened a national youth conference, 3rd week of January in Nepal, with 300 youth from the 7 provinces of the country, all from throughout the country.
Perfect.
And these were like 15 to 29 years. Mm-hmm. There were 35% boys, the rest were girls. Oh. There were community from marginalized community, people, youth living with disability, LGBTI community. So it was a very inclusive conference, and it was called Generation Equality National Youth Conference. In Nepali also we have the same translated meaning, and it was a 2 days conference that I convened in Kathmandu. And it was so exciting. Most of the panel discussions were on, the reason for this conference was, one, we have been blamed several times. Where is your second generation of leaders? What are you doing to build your second generation of leaders? It's not that we have not done, we have attempted, but we have not been successful, So I felt that this would be a forum as part of also 25 years of Beijing conference to hand over the baton of generation equality with a clear conceptual understanding of the background of where we have come so far, and for them to take it forward. So actually in the inauguration, I invited Nepali women who had attended the Beijing conference. We managed to get around 31, including myself, who had attended the Beijing conference. And we honored them, and we asked them to hand over the baton to the representatives of the youth, 7 provinces. You see, so we said, this is the baton for you now, to take it forward. So that was the way we inaugurated the conference. And the concept was, we wanted them to understand the gender equality, the struggles, the movement. We talked about the Beijing conference. My advocacy started actually from my seed was sown in the Beijing conference when I saw the movement, 30,000 women,
amazing,
crying out, yelling, shouting, singing,
women and
dancing.
Men, by the way.
And women and men, I'm sorry, singing and dancing together. And I felt so connected. I felt so much more stronger. So I believe in the power of movement building. Yes. So I wanted this mini conference to be a startup for youth movement building. So during the 2 days, we discussed on the SDGs, we discussed the Beijing Platform for Action, we discussed CEDAW, we discussed, particularly they wanted to discuss stigma, stereotype and mindset, which is so very important.
Culture.
To change. Yes, absolutely. So that was one of the panel. And most of the panelists were, moderators were young people, the panelists were young people. So it was a conversation among themselves, you know, only when we required it to shed light on the previous movement, we moved in. Otherwise, it was their forum. So I think we were very successful in organizing this 2 days national conference. And now we have a list of, we have all those documented, the youth, and we are now promoting this. Of course, we would have organized a conference because they asked for it in each of the 7 provinces of Nepal.
Oh.
But because of the pandemic, we cannot do that now. Yeah. But Sati, I'm now convening every fortnight a webinar with the youth, just started last week. And by December, we will have 12 webinars. The first one was on the well-being of the youth, because there were many suicide cases, you see. So, and then we bring in our UN agenda. What does UN say? Which mandate? So we are actually capacitating them, building them energy and eagerness to be a part of the movement, and showing them that when they understand the UN mechanisms, the advocacy becomes stronger. The doors open up for conversation. So that's what we have learned. So that's how we are teaching them to know about UN, to know about generation equality, to know about the different conferences and conventions that we were part of, you know. So this is our contribution on generation equality.
That is a perfect conclusion for our really exciting session. And I agree with you. This has been really fun and,
I know, it's
and
really
a wonderful conversation.
Yes,
We're going
sometimes we don't get time to remember what we did. And you gave me the opportunity to reflect on all that we had done, my memories, my joys, my sorrows, my frustrations, but overall my gratification. And I would really like to congratulate UN Women on its 10th anniversary and wish it all the best with all of us together, that it will grow stronger and better and fulfill the aspirations of the women who helped to build it.
Thank you so much, Bandana Rana. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. And maybe in 10 years, one of those youth members will be in the CEDAW committee.
Absolutely. I hope so too. Thank you, Soon-Young, for this opportunity. It has been splendid, really.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.